Hi, welcome to another edition of the Lockdown Discussions. This is number 7 with me, Kit Kalis, and him, Gary Budden.
Hello.
And we are, I don't know, excited to talk again. I don't know, this is a lot, man. This is the 7th one in a row, every week, every Thursday.
7 weeks.
Yeah, I didn't think we would get this far, I'll be honest. But actually, what's happening is the subject matter is getting meatier by the day. So today we're going to be talking about prizes and literature to do with prizes. So it could be a bit tasty.
And we didn't really. I don't think we thought that this was going to be as big of an issue as it seems to be, because when we put this out on Twitter yesterday, we had a lot of responses. I think the most questions, queries, and kind of points of view on this more than any other topic we've had. So I think it's going to be a pretty interesting chat.
Yeah, but before we do that, we thought we'd try and make it a little bit normal. And Gary, you wanted to talk about what we've been reading this week.
Yeah, I just thought before going into the sort of heavy, industry stuff, we could have a bit of fun.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, what have you been reading? We work in the book world. Well, surely we read books. Reading anything good at the moment?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because either you're editing or you're reading submissions or whatever. Actually finding time to read other people's books is quite hard. But I am reading currently a wonderful novel called, what is it called? Eminent Domain, by a guy called Carl Neville. And he's one of my favourite writers. And this is, well, what's today? Tomorrow's VE Day, isn't it?
I think so, yes.
So this book, which is a brilliant concept, is as if Soviet communism had become the de rigueur method of sort of formulating your economy and your society, and Britain is a socialist communist utopia in this book. Obviously, it's not a utopia because that wouldn't make a good book. But it's the Republic of Great Britain. It takes place in the Republic of Great Britain. There's about 20 years in the future from now, and it's all about how we got to this point and what revolutions we had. And it's brilliant. It's basically like what's that Man in the High Castle? It's that sort of stuff where it's what would have happened had Britain in 1945 gone properly socialist communist instead of the kind of Clement Attlee welfare statism, which was good. He's not arguing that wasn't good, but he's talking about whether if that went to a much further extreme, what would Britain look like? And he's writing it from a pro-socialist perspective rather than one of.
So it's alternative history is the genre, isn't it? So what kind of a Europe where the Americans didn't flood Western Europe with money to stop the Russians taking over everything.
So in this future, there's a literal divide down the Atlantic, and you have to have your passport and all these checks and stuff as you cross the Atlantic to get to what they call the liberated zone, which is kind of socialist communist Europe. Really interesting.
Yeah. Reminds me of the work of people like Kim Stanley Robinson, who did Red Mars, which is like a history of the future, and then he did the Years of Rice and Salt, which was about a world where white Europeans were basically wiped out by the Black Death. So it was a world without European colonialism. Very interesting book.
Yeah. So very much in that vein, and also quite funny and acerbic, and and biting, and it. For me, being of the left-wing persuasion, it's nice just to read something where someone's going, hey, wouldn't it be great if there was less kind of landowners, and wouldn't it be great if there wasn't as much private property, and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of like he has this utopian vision, and then obviously it slowly starts to unwind because that's what happens with utopias. But it's nice just to read it and pretend you're not in some kind of horrible Tory wet dream that we currently are.
So a nice antidote to all that. Sounds good. Sounds really good.
How about you?
I'm kind of reading 3 books at the moment, which sounds ridiculous, but I'll explain myself because Well, I'm trying to read a bit more non-fiction again. So I've been reading some books about the English Civil War, which is something that's always fascinated me. But I still really, despite being English, like yourself, I don't really feel I know enough about it. So this one, I think, is only okay. I'm reading. I think he was an MP, wasn't he? He was one of your lot,
Tristram Hunt. Oh yeah.
Well, I think this was written, I think, before he was an MP. Anyway,
one of your lot.
So this is the English Civil War at first hand. I think it came out in 2002. It's mainly made up of writings from the period.
Yeah. Okay.
About what's going on, which is fairly interesting. Completely different to that.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved it. I finished it this morning. As you know, I'm a big fan of 90s punk music.
Yes.
That's probably one of my sort of default settings.
Blink-182, Sum 41, Green Day.
A bit of Green Day maybe, but no, I was reading the biography as told by all four members of the band NoFX, and it's
I know NoFX, yeah.
And it's got one of the great titles, I think, of any rock music book I've ever come across, and it's called The Hepatitis Bathtub and Other Stories. And it just, it's about starting in 1983 at the age of 16, and they're still going, and all various stories from then until now, some of which are pretty shocking and dark. Others are really very, very, very funny. And one of them does involve the hepatitis bathtub, but you'll have to read it to find out.
Wow, that's the selling point, if anything. I mean, I think
it doesn't make being a junkie, their drummer was a junkie for many years, look very fun. That's all I'm going to say.
I think if you've been in a band since 1983 in various incarnations and you're still going, there are going to be a lot of stories.
Yeah. But I was saying I was reading 3 books, and that's a nice counterpoint to the kind of very interesting, but slightly dry history of, the politics between the monarchists and Parliament in the 17th century. And the final one is I'm reading short stories in this anthology, Uncertainties 4, which I actually have a story in. I'm not just reading my own story again
over and over.
No. I thought I should read the other stories in there because there's loads of great writers of weird short fiction. So I'm just making my way through that.
Is there a theme to it, or is it just broadly genre based?
The theme is uncertainty. That's why it's called Uncertainty. So I'd say that just a general sort of weirdness. Weird fiction is the theme. Okay. It's a very loose theme. Yeah.
Cool. Who published that?
That's published by Swan River Press, who are based in Ireland. Very good.
Nice. Okay, cool.
And we've both been watching a little bit of Normal People, haven't we?
I think you've watched more of it than I have so far.
Actually, surprisingly, I've really enjoyed it. I don't think I was the target audience for the book. I don't think I was the demographic it was aimed at. But I watched the TV series. I'm 9 episodes in now. Me and my girlfriend are 9 episodes in, and I think it's really good. I think it's some really astute stuff in there about class, and I think it's actually very touching. So I think I've blown all of my kind of street cred with that statement, but there we go. Yeah,
maybe. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with liking and enjoying something that's popular, Gary. I think it's okay. I mean, I'm only 3 episodes in, and I'm kind of waiting for it to get a bit better than just someone didn't take someone else to the ball. But I'm enjoying the characters, and as we've discussed in our private discussions, when I'm frustrated at a character, it shows good writing because I obviously care about the character. And I was incensed and irate that
you were, weren't you?
Did not take Marianne to the deb.
You were really outraged about this.
Absolutely outraged. But that's a compliment to Sally Rooney because I wouldn't be outraged about something I didn't care about. So,
I think actually that what you said about it's okay to like things that are popular, I think that's quite a nice little segue maybe into talking about some of the prize stuff.
Hello, that's
good. How that sort of arose naturally. So, we're talking about prizes today, Kit, aren't we? But what kind of prizes are we talking about?
Well, I mean, literary ones, but I think specifically we're talking about fiction, aren't we? I mean, there are lots and lots of prizes around in publishing. I think publishing thrives on prizes. People like giving out prizes, people like winning prizes, people like moaning that they're not shortlisted, people like celebrating that they're shortlisted. But there are lots of prizes that we're not going to talk about, and things like short story prizes, individual short story prizes, there are so many of them, but also you've got big ones like the Sunday Times Audible Short Story Award, BBC Short Story Award. Like, we're not talking about them. We're not going to touch on non-fiction partly because I guess we're not as au fait with those prizes as we are with the fiction ones, but also I think they kind of apply. What we talk about is going to apply to some non-fiction prizes as well,
and probably some poetry prizes, right?
But, I think poetry's possibly maybe a little bit different, but I think the Forward Prize and T.S. Eliot Prize and stuff like that are probably, I think, the kind of equivalents of the Booker and the Costa or like stuff like that. I think the big poetry prizes are still set in that kind of vein, I think.
So to clarify, we're talking about prizes for books, aren't we? We're not talking about, they're not for individual short stories or individual poems or anything like that. Specifically books, and even more specifically books of fiction, novels, and short fiction, because that's kind of really what we know, and that's what we mainly publish, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's also prizes for writers, like Nobel Prize is a prize for writers. It's a prize for this your sort of oeuvre rather than one particular book. So yeah, it's specifically about one book, and I think we do you want to be on a list of prizes? You want to just run through just so people know what we're talking about?
Yeah, I'd like to say I do actually know most of these off the top of my head, but I actually did a bit of research and wrote them down beforehand for this episode.
I also like the pretend kayfabe of saying, "Do you have a list available?" Knowing that you have a list available. So yeah, we can.
Kayfabe is a brilliant word, but I think if people don't know what it means, go look it up because it's fantastic.
Kayfabe, kayfabe. Yeah.
So there are many prizes of many different sizes, but I think the biggest ones I think are worth mentioning, and we're talking about prizes in the UK, aren't we? UK and Ireland. I think, does Ireland have separate prizes? I think it has a few, doesn't it? So I think
but you can be Irish and win.
You can, can't you?
Prizes.
We'll come to a bit of that later, but I think we're talking about stuff within the United Kingdom as a sort of general rule. So you've got obviously the biggest, most prestigious prize, which is the Booker Prize, which until last year was the Man Booker Prize.
Correct.
What's it called now?
I don't know. I guess it would be called the Cruikshank Booker because Cruikshank are the new sponsors, but I don't know. Maybe it just goes back to being just the Booker, because I think Man Booker fits together fairly well, although it makes it sound like women can't win it. And Cruikshank Booker doesn't have much of a ring to it, I must say.
No, and it was only yesterday I discovered why. It sounds awful to say this, but I only discovered why it was called the Booker Prize yesterday. That was the first time I'd bothered to look at it.
And anyway, the reason for that is deep and interesting, and we will come back to
that. You've also got the Man Booker International, or the Cruikshank Booker International, which is for works in translation. That's a prize, interestingly split between the writer and the translator. Then you've got the Costa prizes. I think that's a big one. They have 5 prizes: first novel, biography, poetry, children's book, and they have a book of the year as well, which is culled from all of those categories. You've got the Walter Scott Prize, which is for historical fiction. Another big one is the Women's Prize for Fiction.
Yeah. Commonly known, oddly, as the Baileys, even though the Baileys doesn't really sponsor it anymore.
It's been a few different ones, hasn't it?
Yeah. What were the other ones? Orange? Was it Orange that sponsored it?
But again, in my research, something again I didn't know, this was founded in the early 90s after the 1991 Booker shortlist had no women on it. So
1991?
I know, that doesn't seem that long ago, does it? I mean, I can remember 1991 fairly well. I was 8. But I suppose we like to think stuff in our lifetime was maybe more progressive than it was. I don't know.
That does surprise me that it was that late.
Which isn't to say women hadn't won the Booker Prize by that point. They had, so we'll come back to that. You've got the Orwell Book Prize for political fiction. That's quite new. The Dylan Thomas Prize, which is for writers under 39. Because that's the age. Well, that's the age, isn't it? Dylan Thomas drank himself to death, wasn't it? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think he drank himself to death over several years, but he died when he was 39.
You've got the James Tate Black Memorial Prizes, which is the oldest literary prize, and that's the Edinburgh Book Festival prize.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got other ones sort of newer but quite important, like the Jalak Prize, which is for BAME writing.
Yeah.
The Gordon Byrne Prize, which is supposed to carry on the spirit of the writer Gordon Byrne, fantastic writer if you haven't read him. The Edge Hill Prize, which I think is the only one for short story collections out of all of this.
Of specifically short story collections. Yeah. I mean, short story collections can win some of the others. So James Tate Black and Dylan Thomas, you can win as a short story collection. You can't win the Booker or the Baileys, the Women's Prize, because that's just for novels.
Yeah.
And you got the Goldsmiths as well, Goldsmiths for experimental fiction, yeah.
Portico Prize is worth mentioning. And in genre, there's the Arthur C. Clarke Award, which is a very big sort of sci-fi prize. And I think importantly for indie presses, you've got the Republic of Consciousness Prize. So that's not even all of them, but as you can see, that's quite a few prizes. But what's our experience of prizes? Would you say as Influx? We've won a few, haven't we?
We've won a few. No,
just a little shrug of the shoulders.
Oh yeah, no, I think we've been long listed for several with several different books. With Atrib and Other Stories, Ellie Williams's book, we won the James Tate Black Award, and we won.
Did we win it though, or did she win it?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose, yeah, she won it. Atrib won it. Let's say that book won the prize, and it also won the Republic of Consciousness Prize for small presses.
That's different. So we won that as a press, and Atrib won it, didn't it? So it was for the press and the book.
Yes, we should come on to talk about that, because I think that's a really innovative and excellent way of doing prize, at least money splitting for independents. But yeah, and we've been longlisted for Dylan Thomas, Edge Hill. We've been what else have we been longlisted for? We've been longlisted for Dylan Thomas twice, I think.
I think the
Jalak. Yeah, that was Hold Tight.
The Edge Hill with a few titles.
Yeah. Gordon Byrne.
Yeah. Even the Shirley Jackson Award, which is I think more of an international for one of our anthologies. I was going to share a small anecdote, which if anyone who was at the ceremony would know this, about the Republic of Consciousness Prize. If you remember, this was, I think, the first kind of proper prize we'd won as a press. And we got up to do our speech, didn't we?
Yeah.
And the prize was kind of, they didn't have a sort of trophy at the point, so it was like a kind of clipboard with a piece of glass on it, and the prize was sort of sheet behind that. And I dropped it, didn't I? I dropped it and smashed it in front of 300 people because I'd been drinking the free sort of champagne and beer all night, and it was on this sort of slidey sort of podium thing, and there we go. It was
I thought
it was pretty punk.
I thought you'd done it on purpose. I'll be honest. I thought we were both drunk, and you were doing a kind of throw your TV out the window thing, and then you smashed it, and everyone went, and I was like, yes, Gary, that's punk. Come on. But it didn't quite. It was kind of a little bit more clumsy than that.
Yeah, I was just clumsy, basically. But
it certainly made it an interesting ceremony.
So that was our first real experience of the prize process. I think that was a good entry into it.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think so. I don't think we're massively experienced in prizes in the sense that, let's say our fellow indie Gary Beggar have won some very prestigious awards like Goldsmiths and the Women's Prize with Ema McBride.
And the Desmond Elliott.
And Desmond Elliott with Preeti Taneja, yeah. And they were shortlisted for the Booker with Lucy Ellman's Ducks Newburyport. I think other indies we're kind of related to or have good relationships with, and Other Stories were shortlisted for the Booker with Deborah Levy. And, I think the prizes are, I don't know if we want to get into this yet, but I think in terms of prizes, people there are some presses which have success, there are some which have medium success, and there's some that just seem to be completely ignored. But I'm not sure why or what that's about, other than, we have to hope, perhaps, that it's the book that carries it through. But I wonder if we
I was going to say, surely people would like to think, at least, surely it's about the work and not the publisher, right? Surely it's about the quality of the novel.
Well, yeah. Should we get into this now?
I think so. I've got my sort of notes I've got for the rough kind of structure for this is I want to talk about, first of all, the benefit for the writer, and is it actually, are prizes just about the quality of the book? Are they really just about this is the best book in its category?
No, I think primarily no. I mean, very good books win prizes, and that's totally fine. I think, most shortlists are going to be full of very good books. The difficulty we're going to run into immediately is how do you objectively win a prize if it's a subjective situation? So what might be the best book to me will not be the best book to you if we're on a judging panel together. And I've been on judging panels not for books, but I've judged short story awards. There is a situation where, some people like one, some people like another, and there is sometimes a situation where you might compromise, and say, well, we both like that one enough that one wins, even though you might be more passionate about another one. So the judging stuff goes on behind closed doors, but I do, and they always come out unanimously. Oh, we all thought this was the best book and stuff. But there are, I mean, I don't read Booker books that much, but I do read some of the other prize shortlists, Goldsmiths and Public Consciousness, and often the women's prize lists, and I'm often not in agreement with the winner as the best book on the shortlist. That's not to say the book itself is bad, but it's to say that I think the better book is X.
Of course, and that's why I suppose that's the inherent absurdity of trying to give prizes to something like fiction, especially literature, because it's such a subjective thing.
Yeah.
The notion that you can go, this is the best novel that's been published this year, or whatever the time period you're talking about, it just seems nonsensical to me.
I think so.
But also prizes are really important, I think. I think it's important to have, it's important for the writer because it can really be transformative to a writer's career, can't it? It really can. And
absolutely.
And we're both writers ourselves. If I wrote a work of fiction, it won a major prize, obviously that's going to be a nice thing, isn't it?
It is going to be nice.
I'm going to turn it down. I'm not going to turn the money down, am I? Unless they were funded by some horrific evil corporation and I was trying to make a political point and I didn't need the money. Do you see what I mean?
You mean funded by a horrendous former slave-owning wealth creation business like Booker?
Well, it's interesting you say that, yeah. And so I said we were looking yesterday, weren't we, at the kind of the history of some of these things, and I never realised why the Booker Prize is called the Booker Prize, and it's named after the Booker. It was first founded and sponsored by the Booker Company, which is a guy called Booker McConnell, I believe, and his family. Not him. I'd like to be very clear to say it's not. He didn't do this, but his company and his family's wealth come from British Guyana, basically built on sort of. Let's say the darker side of British colonial economics.
You mean the slave trade?
Slave trade, and then after the slave trade ended, sort of economic exploitation of people. So that's where the money came from. It doesn't anymore. I didn't know that. I thought that was quite interesting, and I suppose I'm still processing what I think about that. I mean, is it wrong to use money, let's say, earned in a less than ethical way, but then is that wrong to put that into a literary prize and celebrate literature? I don't know.
I suppose if you're extracting money from Guyana and from West African slaves, you probably want to give the money not to some posh white person who wrote a literary humanist novel. You might want to give it to the people you extracted it from. That's just,
Okay, so we'll come to that. You're talking about a sort of huge issues there about diversity and class and all, and
yeah. But I think going back to what before that tangent, going back to what you're saying, I think it's worth discussing for a minute. Yes, winning a prize is great for your career. It's great for your writing. There's no doubt that that's the case. But what does it say about our system and industry that is the case? Why is it that prizes are so important? That is a question I don't have an answer to, but it's something it's worth looking into. Is why is it that, especially with prizes, let's just say there are 20 big prizes as a number. One person wins the prize. That's 20 writers per year get lauded and pushed into an extra space. there were way more than 20 writers doing really interesting stuff getting published each year, yet they don't kind of get lifted onto, elevated up alongside these winners.
No.
So I think there's a question there to be asked about a reward system that rewards very few people.
Yeah, and I don't know how much people watching or listening to this know about the prize process, but something like, let's just use the Booker because it's the huge one. It's not like every novel published is submitted to the Booker, is it? If we do actually submit books to the Booker now, because I think it would be, I don't think it would be silly not to, but I think you've got to be in it to win it, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like every novel is submitted to the Booker because, well, why not? Why not?
Well, you can only submit one book per imprint.
So we have to make a choice, don't we?
Yeah. So
about what might have the best chance of winning the Booker, not what the best book is. What
exactly.
book we think.
Exactly. So we might have 2 or 3 novels we think are excellent. We can't decide which one's quote unquote better, but we'll read them and go, this probably fits the Booker Prize better. This one fits the Goldsmiths Prize better. So you're already playing a game in which you're anticipating an audience and you're anticipating a certain type of book to win. Now that's just us being pragmatic. That's not us supporting the idea that there is certainly a way to win things or that there's a certain book that should win stuff. But I think it's foolish of us as a small press that may rely on prizes to really push ourselves into a different sales space to submit a book that we think is not going to be in competition.
And why wouldn't a book be in competition? Like, why would it not be considered? Like,
Booker.
Or for like whatever prize, really. I suppose they've all got a different feel, haven't they? You mentioned saying like, well, maybe this wouldn't fit with this prize, but would fit for that prize.
Well, I think some have various stipulations, like the Goldsmith is the novel at its most novel. So it would be something that isn't sort of very mainstream written in a style that's written that's kind of not, I don't want to say experimental because we publish very experimental stuff that hasn't been shortlisted for the Goldsmiths, for example, but it's certainly something that it has more of a bent towards playing with form or experimentation. The Booker, I think, it does vary depending on the years of judges, but it has to be something that's, not has to, but I think a lot of the time it's literary but accessible. It's often to do with families or to do with a particular type of historical conflict or to do with a particular type of set of relationships. I'm just trying to think of the last couple of winners. So Milkman, for example, is troubles-led novel. That won. What won the Booker this year?
I've got it was won by two. Well, famously, it was won by 2 books this year, which was quite the controversy. It was The Testaments by Margaret Atwood and Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo.
Yeah, see, Testaments, like I sort of see that as like it's kind of her lifetime achievement Booker, even though she's won the Booker already. With Bernardine, I mean, I think that plays against type a little bit. That book, it's brilliant, but it certainly doesn't fit into what you would normally think of as a Booker winner, and that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. But
so what do you think of as a Booker winner?
Well, that's what I mean. It's that kind of, I don't know. Just what you might term a sort of lyrical humanism, a kind of possibly middle class, writing about kind of the minutiae of life, of delving into the intricacies of relationships and family life, and we have some stuff about class and whatever. But my impression of the Booker is that way. That might not be true. It's if I think of, I don't know if I have a list of Booker winners available to look at, but
I do. I've got the list up.
Just pop through the last 10. Just pop through the last 10.
So last year, was the ones we just mentioned, Atwood and Evaristo. 2018 was Anna Burns' Milkman. 2017, George Saunders, Lincoln in the Bardo. 2016 was Paul Beattie, The Sellout. 2015, Marlon James, Brief History of 7 Killings. 2014, Richard Flanagan, The Narrow Road to the Deep North. 2013, Eleanor Catton, The Luminaries. 2012, Hilary Mantel, Bring Up the Bodies. 2011, Julian Barnes, Sense of an Ending. 2010, The Finkler Question by Howard Jacobson. I don't know that one at all. And 2009, Hilary Mantel again with Wolf Hall.
See, I've just kind of shot myself in the foot, haven't I? Because the first 6 you read out are nothing like what I said.
No, I agree with you, because I would say this probably as a reader, or I was definitely. I'm probably kind of. What's the kind of word where you're sort of a snob, but in the sense that you're like, oh, I'm not going to read a Booker Prize winner.
A reverse snob.
Is that a reverse snob?
I know it's not, is it?
I was always
condescending prick.
Condescending prick. Yeah. I was always had that attitude. I always have since I was about 15, where I suppose I was always drawn to the, I suppose, less commercially successful, the more underground sort of stuff. Not necessarily based on its quality either. Whereas, so I looked through that list, and I shamefully haven't read hardly any of them. The last one I can see that I read and really enjoyed was way back in 2003, which was Vernon God Little by
Sounds good.
Yeah, but a lot of these books I actually do want to read. And I remember when A Brief History of Seven Killings came out, because actually that's something I'm massively interested in the subject matter is about. But I remember thinking at the time, I'll read this in about 2 years, so I don't have to be sat on the tube reading the new Booker Prize winner.
You're worried about what strangers on the tube will think about you.
Pathetic, isn't it?
Yeah, but when this is the thing.
So thought that went through my head. I remember it at the time.
I think okay, so I'm going to slightly correct myself a bit. Other than possibly Marlon James and Paul Beattie, because they're not British, and Anna Burns, the list that you read out, these are fairly established writers.
Yeah.
These are not writers who are they're not kind of new in a way. I mean, Bernardine's been writing for a very long time, and this is her kind of definitely a celebration of her as a 20-year career, which has been really good to see. But I think before that, when you're looking at Flanagan or Hilary Mantel or those names, these are very well-known authors,
but that's okay, isn't it? Because we have lots of other prizes that reward debut novels and reward second novels. And do you see what I mean? So what you're saying is like the Booker is maybe it's the top one because it's almost it's a stamp of approval on a writer who's been working for many years, right? Is that it'd be unlikely?
No, I disagree. I think my personal opinion on prizes is they have an ability to elevate you as a writer, to get you a new audience, to build your career. If you already have a well-known book that's from a well-known writer who has a well-known career, what's the prize doing? The prize isn't doing anything than awarding more stuff to someone who's already won everything. So I feel quite passionately that prizes often, unless they are like this kind of cap on a career, like saying, you know what, you've done brilliantly, you're towards the end of your career, have a prize. Or it's something like with Bernardine, which is, kind of, she's been producing amazing work for years, and now this is a recognition of it. Most of it's like, come on, man, Hilary Mantel doesn't need to win the Booker Prize.
Well, she doesn't need to win it twice, does she?
Well, that as well. And, I think that could go to someone else who's equally brilliant, who's been writing equally brilliant historical fiction.
Sure.
And that would elevate them, and then that would produce more equality across the spectrum, rather than, and you see it like when there's often a sort of little domino where one book gets shortlisted for a prize, and then it pops up in other shortlists, and it becomes an impossible book not to shortlist. And I think that works with prizes outside of literature. With people talk about that with the Oscars. They talk about if you win a BAFTA, it's a signal that you might win an Oscar. Well, why is that?
Absolutely. And I have two separate feelings about these kind of prizes, especially really big ones. One is like us as Influx Press, and thinking about it in terms of how it would, affect us if one of our books were shortlisted for a prize such as the Women's Prize or one of the Costa Prizes or the Booker Prize. I think it would be of great amount of benefit to us, and I'd probably be quite happy because we'd sell a huge amount more books. As a reader, the reader, I don't particularly take much interest in it. Is that a terrible thing to say? I find there's more interesting work being done. I actually think there's more interesting prizes. I think the Goldsmiths Prize for me is more interesting because it's looking at the novel in a more experimental form, whereas you've suggested perhaps the Booker Prize is
Safer.
a bit safer.
I think the Anna Burns book was the press around the Anna Burns win was that it was a quote unquote difficult book.
Yeah, an experimental Northern Irish novel, which was
it's not difficult.
Made headline.
It's great. Like, it's a great book. It's not difficult to read. If you read if you read that sort of literature, it's not difficult. It's the idea that, oh, this is a difficult one because it doesn't just fit the same normal mode of reading, and that I think is where you're probably turned off a bit. Is that the books are not, they may be very, very well written about very interesting subject matter, but they're not flicking a switch in terms of doing anything with the novel.
Maybe not. Or maybe I am just a snob. I don't know. I've got a great quote to read for you from about the Booker Prize.
Okay.
This actually sort of refers to, because we got a lot of tweet questions. One of them, the question was are all prizes rigged? Which was, I thought that was from a young writer, Eliza Clark. She asked, "Are they rigged?" So I found this quote from A.L. Kennedy, writer A.L. Kennedy. She was a judge in 1996 on the Booker, and in 2001 she called the Booker a pile of crooked nonsense, with the winner determined by, quote, "who knows who, who's sleeping with who, who's selling drugs to who's married to who, and whose turn it is."
What won in 1996? That's what I want to know.
Oh, should we find out? Yeah. So I'm just going to look that up, and just, what do you think of that? Harsh words.
I have heard not just about the Booker. I know Julian Barnes, I think it was Barnes, called it Posh Bingo.
Oh, here we go. Last Orders by Graham Swift won in 96. That's a good book, actually.
It's a good book, actually.
I like a bit. Yeah.
But yeah, I remember Julian Barnes called it Posh Bingo. It's one of his things, which does suggest that, there's a certain amount of people that are ever going to win each year. I think maybe it's changed a bit, but I do know, I've talked to people I shall not name, who have, various different people who I shall not name, who have judged prizes and are suggesting that sometimes the prize is not necessarily given to the book that everyone thinks it should be given to. And I've heard quite a few stories, which would be slanderous if I said them out loud, where people have been suggested or heavily leaned on to include a book in the shortlist from the prize itself, and or suggested that a certain book should win regardless of whether the panel think it's the best book. Now, that could be down to commercial reasons, could be down to how you want the prize to look, because depending on the book you award, that gives the prize an identity. Am I right?
Yeah.
So the Booker gets often, I think, possibly a reputation for your weighty literary tone, like your Hilary Mantel's, like your Seven Killings, that sort of stuff. They're big books. They're big literary books. The Goldsmiths is going to live or die on how well its audience thinks it's choosing its experimental novels.
Yeah.
So the books that win give an identity to the prize. They're kind of, as a symbiotic relationship. It's not just that the prize elevates the book. The books also elevate the prize.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that leads us into some of the other prizes, maybe more recent prizes that I think have arisen to try and combat some of the issues here. I mentioned about the formation of what we now call the Women's Prize, because this shortlist didn't have any women on it in 1991 on the Booker Prize, which is interesting to me, because I 100% agree that is not correct, that it needs to be at least try and be gender balanced. However, if it was just a question of quality out of all the books submitted, it would, in theory, be possible for those top 6 to happen to all be by men, right? That would be a possibility.
And vice versa.
And vice versa, right? It could all be by women.
But you're talking about...
But I don't think
it's about an ideal world where there is no inherent bias from judges or readers, or... But
there's women, and this is a positive bias, but I think you do have to be mindful of all these different balances about... not, people from different ethnic backgrounds, people, making sure it's gender balanced, all that kind of stuff. And I think that is important, but that kind of chucks the idea of it just being about quality out of the window. So I'm going to say that's not what the prizes are really about. And that leads me on to things like the Women's Prize, and also like more recent prizes like the Jalak Prize. I mean, what do you think about those? Which is that just for fiction? I know it's for
no, it's across the board. So it's poetry, children's fiction, and non-fiction. So that I mean I respect.
And they're all in competition against each other.
Yeah,
So
it's an interesting one. Like it's specifically to address again an imbalance in terms of who's been winning prizes and who's been shortlisted, and historically, obviously, the prize industry has overlooked particularly British, Black and Asian and other sort of marginalised writers, and the Jalak Prize is set up to do that. What I find interesting about the Jalak Prize is how do you judge it? Like, how do you judge a children's book against poetry, against non-fiction, against fiction? I, as a judge, I would find that, I think, incredibly hard. That's not to denigrate the prize itself. It's just a curiosity of, like, how would you judge that? And I think with the Women's Prize, it's necessary to have, and I think we would be in a good world if we didn't need it. What I do think happens with the Women's Prize, though, at the same time, is, maybe it doesn't have the same identity in terms of what the literature is. We're talking about the Booker again being kind of, literary fiction. We're talking about Goldsmiths being experimental fiction. We're talking about what other prizes are there? The historical fiction one. What's that? Wainwright one? Or...
No, the Walter Scott Prize.
Walter Scott Prize. That's historical fiction, right? And then you go to women's fiction. Well, now, what is women's fiction? Isn't a thing.
Yeah,
that's fiction written by women, right?
Well, I think that's a huge debate to be had. Yeah, I would agree. It's not really a genre of writing, is it? You're right. It's not the same as historical fiction, or like I said, the Clarke Award, which is for science fiction or imaginative fiction.
Now, that doesn't negate the need for the prize. It just makes me interested on how that's judged. Because if you're talking about a very commercial, title like, I don't know, Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, great book, but at that kind of hyper commercial end of things, it's good fun, it's interesting, it's written very well, but it's marketed in a certain way. Are you pitching that against Email McBride, which is kind of, at that, or Lucy Ellmann, which is like 1,000 pages of one sentence, rambling interior monologue. Those two books are individually, you can say, objectively good books. Can they be judged against each other? I don't know.
Yeah, it's something I think about all the time. It seems I would
every waking hour. You're just
it consumes me every night. I really don't know. I think that's for people to decide themselves. But I think for me, the kind of takeaway from that is that the prizes definitely serve a function. But just if anyone thinks it's just about the quality of the book, as if that could be proven that one book is better than another, it's not true. I mean, I'm aware that we've already rambled on for a long time. Should we look at some of the questions we got from Twitter?
Twitter questions, yeah.
So I've got a few here. I screenshotted them in advance. We have one from Isabel. I hope I get the name right. Widener.
Yeah.
Whose book "We Are Made of Diamond Stuff" did this win a prize, or was it shortlisted?
It was shortlisted for the Goldsmiths. Yeah,
and that was published by Dostoevsky Wannabe, who are very small indie from Manchester. So that was very good. I mean, a great result for them. They say, as a non-traditional writer, I had to get shortlisted for literally several fairly major prizes before the literary establishment, whoever they are, and media paid any attention to my work whatsoever. And that's despite lots of reader support and attention from the art world. Why do you think that is?
I think what they're talking about there is, and in fact, I remember seeing this because I talked to Isabel the other week and I was looking up something about Weird Diamond Stuff. And that was reviewed in The Guardian when it was shortlisted by the Goldsmiths and not before. And I imagine what they're saying there is there's been no attention from what the establishment might be, which is probably the literary press, maybe Waterstones, the big players in the industry have totally ignored that book, despite the fact it's got this high quality and big readership, and the art world is interested in it. So we're looking there at Isabel's book only being acknowledged in its existence because of a prize shortlist. That's interesting.
So I'm trying to think back. So Atrib by Ellie Williams that we published, after that, that had done fairly well, hadn't it, before the prize nominations and winning the prizes? But I think that helped push it to the next level, didn't it? Especially the James Tate Black.
Definitely. Yeah, I think you reach a different audience because as a small publishing house, you can only go so far. And what prizes give you is PR that you can't generate yourself.
It's PR, and it's just easier, isn't it, for if someone who's looking, the literary establishment, wherever they live, or the people writing about these things. I think it's just probably easier just to look, right, what's won the prize? Let's cover that. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
you've got to do less research that way. And then I know that sounds cynical, but come on, that's got to be part of it, isn't it? It's just and it's because it's already been given a stamp of approval by a reputable prize, right?
So you can't go wrong if you're reviewing it, right?
Yeah, and you're like, well, they said it was good.
I mean that's probably an exaggeration, but I don't think you're too far off. I also remember talking to a film agent about some of our books, and he was talking about kind of wanting to delve further into the kind of literary stuff, and was asking where does he find books to read, and I said, well, how do you currently find them? And he goes, oh, the agency just look at the top 10 bestsellers and read them, and that you can apply that to prizes as well. They probably read the book of prizes, and then go, maybe we want to turn that. That's not a good way of finding stories necessarily.
No, it's not, and especially us as independent publishers and always looking for good new work. And me as a reader, I think that's not a good way. If you're a serious reader or seriously into it, I don't think it's not nowhere near enough to just look at who's winning the prizes and reading those books. No,
right. Next question.
We got one from Bonnie Brooks. She says, how over-representation of younger prizes means people are likely to miss out. Working class, lower middle class writers, or writers battling a lot of ACE, which is defined as adverse childhood experiences. So I think the kind of point there is prizes that are aimed at younger people. How many of those are there? We mentioned the Dylan Thomas Prize, which is for writers under 39. Yeah. I feel this is more of an issue for the short story prizes and stuff like that. But am I missing any out? There's the
Betty Trask Award.
Trask Awards, yeah.
You can't really. I mean, you do win that, but it's not the same as the Dylan Thomas, I don't think. No. I think there's another one, but I can't remember what it is. But there is also, to balance the Betty Trask Award, there is the McKitterick Award for writers over 40.
Yeah.
So, you're looking at, that's obviously a barrier that they see, that as soon as you turn 40, you're somehow a different writer. I don't know how that works. I have sympathies with Bonnie on that front. I think people can come to writing very late, and they shouldn't be necessarily discriminated against for that. And, if you've, let's say, pick a problem that will impede you writing, you're a single mum, age 21, you're not going to be able to write a book for a very long time. And so, that I get that. But at the same time, we do have to celebrate youth. A person writing a book in their 20s that's really good is an exceptional thing. I don't think that's the norm. And I think that should also be celebrated. And young people should be encouraged to write and be creative and do as much as they can. And if we're going to be talking about this sort of positive discrimination, which we are with the Women's Prize and we are with the Janak Prize and stuff like that, I think having a prize for young people is the same thing. Young people, particularly, let's say there's in the last 10 years, there's been a generational war against young people.
I would agree with that. Yeah, and I think we have enough prizes. The list I read out was very long, and that wasn't even all of them. So I think I think there's room for prizes for younger people and people who come to writing later in life. Like I said, I feel I need to do some research on this. I feel that it's more of an issue with short story prizes and things like that, kind of maybe the more entry level prizes, but I may be wrong. We've got loads to talk about still, haven't we? But
I think we can crack on. On. Just as a word of warning, it'll probably be another 20 minutes. You might want to pause the podcast and come back. But I don't. Yeah, we were thinking of splitting this. I don't think we should split it. I'll be honest, because
I'm in the kind of.
We've got the momentum, haven't we?
We've got the momentum now. So I've got these are some good questions. These are two from Anna Vort, who we're publishing later this year. She just had a book out with Blue Moose.
The question isn't: is my Influx Press book going to win a prize? Is it?
No, it isn't.
Okay,
She asked two questions. I'm going to ask the second question first because it's more a kind of practical one, but I thought this was a really good question. She says, I don't understand how some competitions have books in their list which have not been published yet. Because this is something I always used to wonder as well. Now I know the answer. But Kit, what is the answer to that?
Well, I mean, you'll see this. You'll have definitely seen this with the Booker Prize last year. Salman Rushdie's, what was it called? Q or Quixote or whatever it's called, his Cervantes book, and the Testaments, Margaret Atwood book, they were both long-listed before the books had been released. Now, the technical reason for that being able to happen is that as a publisher, you submit the book 6 months before the prize long list is announced anyway. So if you can get your book printed as an advanced copy well in advance, or sometimes you can submit an electronic copy, you don't have to release it. A publisher can release a book whenever they want. They don't have to release it just because they printed it. They can just sit on that book as much as they like. So that's the technical answer. You can submit these books to prizes before they're out, and people can read. The judges can read them. I think, on the other hand, it's a bit mean. I think it's hard on the reader, because the readers are like, they can't discuss the long list. They haven't read the books.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Why isn't this on the long list when this is on the long list? Because you haven't read two of them. How can you judge what should be on the long list? So I think it's a bit hard on the reader, and I think it feels to me a bit too like industry backslapping.
I do agree, but we've entered books now in advance of their publication, haven't we?
We have. I don't think things that we've entered for would win before they've come out, though.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that one. Of course, and this will relate to this and a second question, which is something I really wanted to talk about anyway. But it does maybe it puts the smaller press at the disadvantage if they don't have as long lead times, if they're rushed for it. If you don't have those review copies maybe 6 months in advance or before that deadline, you just might not be eligible for the prize. So I don't know if that's right or not. I don't know what the answer to this is, because each prize has a different time window. It might be novels published from October 2020 to October 2021. So if we've got a book out next year, but we have it early, we can submit it early, can't we?
But you and I both know submitting to prizes and staying on top of them is a nightmare. We have like a huge spreadsheet where each year the dates change, so you have to enter in whatever the dates are when they're announced. You have to keep checking back when it's going to be announced, or you get an email from the prize.
Absolutely does my head in.
But the difficulty we have, this is probably good to explain to people who maybe don't work at that end of publishing or aren't anything to do with publishing, just interested in hearing what we're talking about, is you can win a prize in 2020 for a book that was published in 2018. You can also win a prize in 2020 with a book that was published in 2020. The different prizes have different windows in which the book is eligible, and then they award that prize at a different time. It's very difficult to stay on top of that. And I think once we got our spreadsheet really sorted out, we then actually had an efficient method of doing it. But it wasn't, a number of years we were behind on submitting to prizes, definitely.
Yeah, and I find when I'm dealing with that sort of side of things, it's very odd, because all of a sudden I feel like I'm like in this year, but I'm also back in 2019, but I'm also in 2021 in the future. It's really, I don't know how to explain it. It's this sort of temporal dislocation. You're thinking, when was that book published? And what? Anyway, it's just, but that's what. Anyway, I hope that answers that question. The other question was, this is a lot deeper, I think. I'm not an expert, of course, but it doesn't seem right that there should have to be a big financial outlay for the publisher for certain prizes. I just looked at the investment required for the Booker and the women's prizes, because couldn't that put an indie in a difficult position or rule out entering? A great question, and I think the answer is, well, it does. It can be. It's a risk, isn't it? It's a big risk for us.
Do you want to explain why it's a risk? Maybe you can give a couple of examples as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to use the Costa Book Award as an example for this. So it doesn't mean we're perfectly eligible to enter our books for a big prize, such as the Costa First Novel Award, let's say. So we can enter it, and all you have to enter it, you only have to send in 5 copies of the book. Great, that's fine. However, if we were shortlisted, which you would think is a good result for us, if we were shortlisted, we would have to send in 20 additional copies, and then possibly another 30 copies. So we're sending out 55 copies of the book for free. No guarantee the book will win. If the book were to win, it says, this is the criteria. Publishers of each of the 5 Costa Award winners are required to make a contribution of £5,000 towards the general promotion of the winning book. And then if you win the Costa Book of the Year, which is the grand prize, is an extra £6,000. So you could, if you win, be expected to pay out £11,000. And I think you're probably looking at higher amounts for prizes like the Women's Prize and the Booker Prize. Am I right?
I think so. The Booker, I know, is £5,000 on a shortlisting, which you have to pay marketing. They call it marketing costs. I'm curious about that, because let's say the Costa Prize, and this may be something I say which means we will never win the Costa Prize, but I am not going to pay for you to put your branding on my book. You should be paying me to put your branding on my book.
It's an odd one, isn't it? I just think
it's like when you pay 5p to Tesco's to carry a Tesco's bag, and you're just a walking advert carrying a bag around, and you've paid for the pleasure. It makes no sense.
Well, it makes sense for Costa, the company.
Yeah, or Costa. Yeah, well, this is the thing. But, like, in all reality, yeah, sure, big publishers will pay for that, because it will pay off eventually, because you get all the marketing splurge from the reviews, from being in Waterstones, or the big Costa Booker Prize winning stuff. Costa Award winning blah, blah, blahs. 11 grand for us. That's insane to have that sort of capital in reserve to pay. Like, we would never be able to pay that.
But I suppose the thing is, that's only once you've won. So you would hope you'd make that money back, and then
you've got to make it back. So you've got to have it in the first place. Mm-hmm. It's a question of having the capital reserves.
So, question for you then: would it put you off entering these prizes?
No, because we still enter them, don't we?
Okay, so I've got the question. So you were in charge of this year entering some books for the Booker Prize. What happens if? What happens in the extremely outlandish scenario that an Influx Press published book ended up on the Booker shortlist?
Okay, caveat.
And all of us,
caveat. I've got a caveat here. This is not my commitment in stone. Right? So don't pull me up on it if this does happen.
Don't. This is you sort of idea jamming right now, isn't it?
yeah, I'm just an ideas anarchist, really. But yeah, I think so. Based on Gary Baker's experience, our friends Gary Baker, the Lucy Ellman's book got shortlisted, and they paid £5,000, and that's a lot of money. And I think we were all behind them when they were talking about how unfair that is, and that it's not quite right, and campaigning to have a lower fee for smaller presses. Now that is, if there was a lower fee for presses that turn over less than £100,000 a year, or have like only 2 members of staff or whatever, then I probably wouldn't mind paying let's say it's £1,000 or something like that, right? I probably wouldn't mind paying that as much. If, on the other hand, the Booker Prize insisted to be paid £5,000, which would be the same amount as what Penguin Random House might pay, or Hachette might pay, who turn over £3 billion a year, I would prefer, perhaps, in that scenario, if the writer was okay with it, in refusing to pay, telling them to go fuck themselves, and then making a big PR splash about it.
So
And
you'd make a stink. You'd make a real nuisance of yourself.
Like I said, with a caveat, this is not my 100% commitment, but I would be very tempted, very, very tempted to kick up a fuss about it publicly and say, this is outrageous, I'm not going to pay it. You are denying this writer their opportunity to be shortlisted by forcing their small press, who does not have the capital, to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? And I think what you've raised an interesting point there, that there's currently a certain way of doing things, right? There's Isabel mentioned the literary establishment. There's a certain system in place. However, I think that system is changing slightly. There have been some successes from small presses that are forcing that conversation to change. Dutch News Report being on the shortlist of the Booker is one of them. The Gallows poll published by Blue Moose, which won the Walter Scott Prize, that would be another. I think our own book, Ellie Williams, winning the James Tate Black, and numerous other examples.
Fitzcarraldo winning a lot of Man Booker.
Of course, we forgot to mention them. So, so I think is changing the conversation slightly, and I like your idea of just entering but then not playing the game properly.
It's a bit disruptive. I think I would never think badly of anybody, including myself, who decided to play the game were it presented in front of me. I think it's easy for me to say it sitting here on my own in my room without an Influx Press book shortlisted for the Booker Prize. But
and of course we have a responsibility to the author, don't we?
Of course, and that is one of the bigger issues at play here. Is by kicking up that fuss, are you actually damaging the author's ability to win the prize or opportunity or potential? That's a question. That's what I'm saying. I would talk to the author about it first. I would never do it against their wishes. The other thing I think interesting to talk about, what's changing and the pressures that small presses are putting on stuff. There's also, you can look at stuff like the Jalak Prize and the Republic Consciousness Prize as also prizes that are putting pressure on other prizes. Although I said it would be hard to judge the Jalak Prize, personally, I wouldn't know how to judge a children's book against non-fiction, against poetry. It's certainly a prize that's necessary in giving exposure to writers that possibly wouldn't get the same exposure or long listings or short listings in other prize areas, and the Republic Consciousness is definitely giving the prize a kick up his arse by doing this split between the publisher and the author.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. And I mean, obviously, we won it. That was a very lovely experience, including smashing the award. It's only been going for 5 years? I think it was set up in. I was just looking through some old Guardian articles. I think 2016 was when it was being set up. I don't know if that was the first year we won. Did we win this? We won the second.
Yeah, Fitzcarraldo won the first year. Yeah,
they did, didn't they? And I think that's a great prize, and I think that is slowly changing the conversation. And I think it's helped make small press, independently published small press books taken more seriously. Yeah. Just going back to sort of the Twitter conversations that were happening. The novelist Lee Rourke, writer of The Canal and Vulgar Things, and Glitch, recently from Dead Ink. What did he say? He said 15 years ago, indies were non-existent, and if they were presumably if he means they were existent, they were ignored by major prizes. I don't think indie presses were non-existent, but I don't think they had the presence they have now, do they? And I think prizes like the Republic of Consciousness.
Does he mean small presses? Because like an independent publishing house could be Favour.
Okay, so I always like to try and define the terminology here. Independent just means anything that's not a big five publisher. So that would include Granter and Faber.
Yeah.
I think when people say independent publishers, they mean publishers like our sort of size. Yeah. The Republic of Consciousness defines a small publisher as independent and less than 5 full-time employees.
Right. There you go. So I think that's probably what Lee's talking about is that element of stuff. And he's right. I mean, although those publishers existed, like Express and publishers like that. And Salt was certainly around more than 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, were they winning prizes? They probably weren't. I don't know. There were less prizes, I think, for a start.
Yeah.
What I do think possibly has happened is mainstream major publishing got lazy and stopped chasing after good literature and stopped finding new voices and stopped, or maybe never did, in the example of like particularly Black British authors and British Asian authors, like just never bothered to find them in the first place. Like
Yeah.
so this is what the independent publishing small press scene has been doing for 15 years, is pushing all these writers.
Yeah.
And when you look at the Jalak Prize long lists, for example, there's often lots of small presses on there. Although I will say, if anybody from the Jalak Prize is listening, small press has only won one of them in the last 4 or 5 years, so maybe have a look at that.
But it's not a small press prize, is it?
It's not a small press prize, but I think there is an element there. This is not to directly criticise the Jalak Prize. This is just prizes in general. If you're ignoring independence and small presses and stuff like that, you're ignoring a hell of a lot of really, really groundbreaking, boundary pushing literature, which often feeds the rest of the industry later on.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about the place like the Booker long listing, shortlisting being a barrier to entry because of how much money you need to enter. Sorry, if you get shortlisted, that will discourage some people from entering.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really big problem in general. I think there's, other publishing, other prizes where they could. I've said this in my silly little manifesto that I wrote a couple of weeks ago. Books that don't need the publicity shouldn't win prizes. I think that's just the bottom line for me. You don't need to be giving prizes to books that are selling 100,000 copies, 50,000 copies. They don't need the publicity.
I agree, essentially. I'm aware we've rambled on for probably over an hour now. So we've got like last set of questions from Twitter. I think these came through today. This is from Paul Cheney, half man, half book. He's got 4 questions in here. Let me pick out. Right, we're talking about the Booker again, so I like this one. And I've thought differently about my answer. I was going to answer differently to this, and now I've thought about it. Should the Booker be closed to overseas authors again? Now, he doesn't mean overseas authors, does he? No. The Booker was always open for UK, Ireland, Commonwealth, like South Africa, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
What it means, it wasn't just English language, was it? So you couldn't enter it if you were from the USA, and now you can. So people like Paul Beattie and George Saunders have won it.
Yes.
I was going to say I don't really care, but I thought about it, and I think I've come more around to your point of view, and I think the Americans shouldn't be allowed to enter it because there's enough US cultural colonialism as it is, and they have their own prizes. And it's such a huge country with its own industry. So
what's the equivalent of the Booker in the US? Pulitzer Prize,
yeah.
We can't enter the Pulitzer, can we?
No.
So it's about exchange, not imperialism. But then the Booker Prize is all about imperialism anyway, because it's the Commonwealth.
It's an interesting point. Like, say, Paul Beattie's book, which is, I really need to read it. It sounds really interesting, but you've kind of raised this issue of maybe Black British writing not getting as much exposure. What's the value of giving it to an African American when it's primarily a British? But I don't know. I don't know what I think about that. You made me think.
Wow, that was yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you're. The Booker Prize will slap itself on the back and say, "Look, we've awarded another Black author the Booker Prize," and it's gone to an American. Marlon James is from the Caribbean, which has, I guess, more historically tied exploitation to Britain, and so rewarding Caribbean writers with 50 grand from Britain sits better with me than an American. Also, I think there isn't, I don't know, but I don't know what Caribbean prizes there are out there, so I'm not able to say that. But certainly with the Pulitzer and stuff like that, you've got equivalent big prizes in the US. I don't know what the equivalent big prizes in the Caribbean are, but it sits better with me that the Caribbean, particularly with its current cultural links to Britain. You know, we have hundreds of thousands of Caribbean diaspora here, which would make that link much more kind of obvious to me than an American winning. Now,
are you happy with the links with Canada? That's obviously how Margaret Atwood won it back for the was it the Blind Assassin? Australians.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Kiwis.
know. Like, I think there's an issue there of the Booker Prize sometimes can talk about its diversity without actually celebrating the diversity of the place it's from.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Some other questions. Do we think there are too many prizes? I can answer this one. I'm gonna say no. Okay. I think it's fine to have lots of prizes, and I think actually you can address those issues then, like you shouldn't have too many for writers under a certain age or over a certain age. And I think as long as you get away from this idea that it's just about the quality, you can recognise things that need to be recognised.
Isn't being published a prize in itself, Gary?
It is, yeah. And I think we should end on this question here.
Okay.
What would you do if you could change things? You go first.
In the prize world?
We're talking in the literary prize world that we've been discussing.
Okay, the first thing I would do is no judges can be from the media or be famous or have anything to do with the literary world. I think anybody who judges should be like a jury, like a literal jury service, where, you know, you're a reader, you love reading, and then someday you get a letter to the post. You have been selected to be a Booker Prize judge this year. And that's when you're going to get real, interesting shortlists, interesting results. And it's actually the readers that then determine who wins the prize, not, you know, that's where you're going to get rid of these suspicions of inside dealing and who's shagging who and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, the judging system, there has to be a flaw in it if all the people are from essentially the same walk of life. What if everyone knows each other from I don't know. I think that's problematic.
Yeah,
I think that makes it hard to make changes. Not actually through the judge's fault, but like we've said earlier, with sort of commissioning editors all being from a certain class background or a certain social background. If all the judges are from a certain background, it's likely they might all have a similar sort of taste.
Exactly. Whereas if you've got 5 different people from across the country, for just selected at random by some good statistics company or whatever.
Presumably they have to like books and enjoy reading.
Yeah, I think that's probably a prerequisite. Maybe you have to apply for it, and then you get selected at random. And I think that would be a really good way of dealing with the idea that you know, these things are all tied up and like Eliza said, rigged. Of course, the prize is never rigged when you win it.
No,
but it's rigged when everyone else wins it. That's.
I mean, I think prizes are quite. In some ways, I quite enjoy the process. I suppose I have my reservations about them, but we do enter. I think it's very worth saying we do enter prizes. We enter pretty much all that we're able to, don't we? Because I feel that we owe that to our authors. You know?
Yeah. Oh yeah, don't want to get my prejudices in the way of of our authors' careers.
And I'd say, what would I do to change things? I would seriously, for the big prizes, what I would change is this kind of fee system and the huge economic cost it's going to require from smaller publishers like ourselves and Galliburger and all that, because I don't really think it's justifiable.
No. Or if they need, so what's the shortlist for the Booker Prize? Let's just pretend it's 10 books. It isn't. Let's pretend it is. And each publisher pays $5,000. That's $50,000. That's why they obviously need $50,000 for marketing. Now, why can't, if there's 5 of those 10 publishers, 10 books published by a corporation, why can't the corporation pay $10,000 and the small press pay nothing?
I agree. I mean, I think Costa could afford it.
I also think it's a lot of the time, small presses is a different issue we can come to another time, but small presses are feeder clubs to the big presses. So maybe there should be a little bit of a redistribution of wealth there.
And that almost takes us back to your beginning with your communist novel.
Yeah, okay. Right, well, that's been a pleasure.
Where we begin.
Right. Should we call it a day?
I think we should, yeah. But that's been a great chat. I think it's really
Um,
interesting. So
anybody looking for some really controversial opinions, maybe come to me privately, because I don't want to lose any prizes, and I don't think you do either. So if you came here for real beef, might not have got it.
But I think it's good to talk about these things. I think these are not
Yeah,
issues that are spoken about publicly enough.
possibly not. No. Okay,
That
so
seems to be the kind of raison d'etre now behind these podcasts,
I
doesn't
think
it?
so.
We've
Yeah.
sort of stumbled into it, but I like it.
Are we going to be locked down next week? Probably.
I think so, yeah.
All right. Well then, until next week.
All right, goodbye.
Goodbye.